"Stay away from my mom," said the boy. The Lycan king knelt before them. The forest was silent, save for the whisper of leaves in the cold evening wind. Shadows stretched long across the path, bending unnaturally as if the darkness itself were alive. In a small, weathered cottage at the forest's edge, Mara stood by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. Her son Elias sat on the floor, playing with a wooden toy, but his eyes were fixed on the woods beyond. "Mom," he said, his voice small but tense, "did you hear that?" Mara's hands paused on the windowsill. She had heard it. The faint rustle of movement that did not belong to the wind. She shook her head, forcing calm. "It's just the trees, Elias." "Nothing to worry about." But the boy's sharp gaze did not waver. "No. It's something else. I know it." Even at 10, Elias had the heart of a guardian. Mara had long learned that his instincts were not to be ignored. Tonight, however, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the falling temperature. From deep within the forest, a figure emerged. At first, it seemed no more than a shadow, gliding silently over the uneven ground. But as it stepped into a sliver of moonlight, Mara's breath caught. The figure was taller than any man she had ever seen. Its presence was commanding, even terrifying. Long silver hair caught the faint light, and eyes, like molten amber, pierced the darkness. A cloak of black fur, dark as night itself, draped over broad shoulders. The Lycan king had come! Elias stood abruptly, gripping his toy. "Stay away from my mom!" he shouted, his small frame trembling but unyielding. The figure halted, and for a moment the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, the king lowered himself to one knee before the cottage door. It was not a gesture of submission. It was respect, or perhaps something older, more solemn. Mara's heart raced. Fear and fascination collided inside her. She wanted to hide, to flee, yet she felt rooted to the spot, as if invisible chains bound her to the scene. The boy's hand shot toward her sleeve, seeking reassurance. "Mom! What is he?" Mara swallowed hard. I don't know." The Lycan king's voice, when it came, was low and calm, carrying across the clearing with a power that vibrated in the bones. "I did not come for your life," he said, "but for your presence and for your son's safety." Elias's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" The king's gaze softened as he looked at Mara. There was a sadness in his eyes, ancient and heavy. "Your bloodline," he said, almost to himself, "carries what I have lost for centuries. You do not yet understand, but your existence changes everything." Mara felt a strange pulse in her chest. These were not the words of a villain seeking harm. They were words of longing, regret, and a kind of reverence that unsettled her.
Yet the warning in the boy's voice remained sharp. "Mom, we have to go inside." Before she could respond, the king rose slowly, the fur of his cloak shifting like a living shadow.
He did not move threateningly. His movements were measured, as though he were weighing every step against an invisible scale of morality. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between Mara and the towering figure. "I said stay away from my mom," he repeated, this time with louder determination. The king tilted his head, studying the boy. "And yet you are small," he said softly. "But your courage is formidable." Elias's chest heaved. "I'm not afraid of you." The king's amber eyes flickered, and for a moment something ancient and human shone through the beastly exterior. He knelt again, this time lowering his head toward the boy's level, not in weakness, but in a strange, respectful acknowledgement of his bravery. "I mean you no harm," the king said, "but danger comes whether you are ready or not." Mara felt the words sink into her like ice water. She had lived a quiet life since her husband's death, keeping herself and her son safe, avoiding the whispers of the woods.
Yet here, in one moment, she felt the fragile veil between the ordinary and the supernatural peel away. Elias, though young, sensed the tension.
He glanced at his mother, fear and determination warring in his expression. I don't trust you, he whispered. The king's gaze met the boy's steady and unwavering. Trust is not given lightly, he said. But sometimes it is the only way to survive. A sudden rustle from the forest drew everyone's attention. The wind shifted, carrying with it an almost imperceptible scent of danger. Mara instinctively stepped closer to Elias, wrapping her arm around him. Come inside, she said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. Now! The king inclined his head slightly. I will remain until the night ends, he said. But I will not harm you. As Mara drew the boy into the safety of the cottage, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt, a mixture of dread and curiosity. There was something in the king's presence that spoke of loss, regret, and a kind of longing that she had never encountered. Inside the cottage, the fire crackled weakly, throwing shadows that danced across the walls. Elias pressed himself against Mara, eyes wide, still unconvinced. Mom, what if he's lying? Mara knelt to meet his gaze, her hands resting on his shoulders. Then we will face it together, she said. Her voice carried a strength she didn't fully feel yet. But something tells me he is not the monster we feared! Outside, the king lingered near the edge of the woods. The moonlight glinted off his silver hair as he watched them. For a moment he seemed smaller, almost human, and yet the weight of centuries lingered in his posture. He spoke, though his voice barely rose above the wind. The prophecy speaks of a woman who can awaken what has been lost, he murmured, and a child whose courage defies the darkness. Together they may bring what has been long denied, a chance at redemption. Elias stiffened at the words, but Mara's heart quickened. Prophecy, curses, redemption, these were not the ordinary concerns of a widow and her son, and yet the king's presence was undeniable, a force as old as the forest itself, threading its way into their lives. The night deepened, and Mara felt sleep tug at her despite the tension. She held Elias close, whispering, We will face whatever comes together. But the king's gaze remained fixed on them, unblinking, a silent sentinel beneath the moon. He had come seeking something beyond the boy's protection, something tied to Mara's very blood, and he would not leave without it. The wind carried a faint, almost sorrowful howl through the trees, neither fully animal nor human. Elias shivered, hiding his face against his mother's shoulder. Mara knew then that the world they had known, the quiet life they had built, was over. From the shadows, the king stepped closer. The light of the moon glinted off his claws, but there was no aggression in his movement. Instead, it was a gesture of warning, of respect, of promise. I will not harm you, he said again, voice low and resonant. But the darkness, it will test you. Elias pulled back slightly, staring at him with equal parts fear and defiance. Then we will fight it, he said, surprising even himself. The king's amber eyes softened for a moment, and something almost imperceptible, a flicker of sorrow, passed through them. You have courage, he whispered. But courage alone is not enough. As the fire crackled, shadows long and twisting, Mara realized the truth she had been avoiding. Their lives were about to intertwine with a world far older, darker, and more dangerous than any tale she had heard. And in that intertwining, her son's defiance, her own curiosity, and the king's long-buried sorrow would all collide, shaping a fate none of them could yet imagine. The night stretched on, and the king retreated to the edge of the forest, watching and waiting. His presence was a silent threat, a guardian, a prisoner of his own curse. Mara and Elias huddled close, unsure whether to fear or hope, and yet both felt the pull of something ancient, something powerful, threading through the cold air between them. Then, in a whisper carried by the wind, the king spoke, so softly that only Mara could hear. I did not come for your life, but for your soul. Elias gasped, gripping his mother's arm. Mara felt the weight of the words heavy as stone, pressing into her heart. She did not know what they meant, only that their world had changed forever. Outside, the forest waited, and the Lycan king knelt in silence, as patient as the shadows, as determined as the moon rising over a kingdom he could not yet claim. The first chapter of their story had begun. The morning fog clung to the forest like a soft gray veil, obscuring the world beyond the cottage. Elias sat at the wooden table, his small hands wrapped around a cup of barely warm tea. His amber eyes, wide and alert, darted to the forest edge, as if expecting the Lycan king to emerge from the mist at any moment. Mara poured another cup of tea, trying to maintain calm, though the unease in her chest refused to dissipate. Sleep had come fitfully, haunted by the king's words. "I did not come for your life, but for your soul." "Mom?" Elias said, voice tight with concern. "Why does he want us? Why me?" Mara knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her gaze softened but carried the weight of uncertainty.
I don't know, Elias.
But sometimes the world we see is only a small part of what is real. There are things hidden, ancient things. He belongs to that world. Elias frowned, frustration and fear mingling. I don't care about his world. He's scary, and he's not supposed to be near us. Mara took a deep breath, remembering the moment the king had knelt before them. There had been no threat in his stance, only sorrow, a deep, unspoken longing. And yet, danger clung to him like a shadow. Before she could answer, a movement in the fog caught both their attention. From between the pale, skeletal trees, the Lycan king emerged. The ground seemed to shift beneath his feet, though no sound of it reached the cottage. Elias stood, placing himself in front of Mara. "I said stay away from my mom," he shouted. His small fists clenched. The king paused, his amber eyes calm, but his presence immense and undeniable. "I have not come to harm you," he said, his voice deep like distant thunder softened by wind. "But the danger you sense, it is real, and it will come whether you are ready or not." Elias's chest heaved with tension. "Then go back to your forest!" The king did not move backward. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I cannot. Not yet. For what lies ahead, I may be the only one who can protect you." Mara swallowed, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "Protect us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "From what?" The king's eyes flickered with a shadow of something almost human. Regret, grief, and a memory of a long-lost past. "From those who would use you," he said, "and from the darkness that watches, always." Elias's frown deepened. "Use us?"
What do you mean?
The king looked past the boy toward the rising sun behind the fog. "Your blood carries a gift, one that has been lost to my kind for centuries. And those who crave power will stop at nothing to take it." Mara's heart pounded. She had known little of her family's history, and yet something ancient stirred in her veins. She remembered her mother's faint warnings from long ago. Tales of magic, of lineages lost and found, of curses that clung like shadows. But those were stories, myths. She had never imagined she would be at the center of such a tale.
Gift? She asked cautiously. Elias doesn't have any gifts like that.
"He's just a boy!" The king's gaze softened, resting on the child. "Courage is a gift, and the power that flows through your blood may awaken through him, but it is fragile and dangerous." Elias's small hands gripped the edge of the table. "I don't want power. I just want my mom safe." The king nodded slowly, as though Elias had answered a question only centuries of experience could understand. "Then you will need courage," he said. "More than you know." Mara felt a strange pull toward him, a mixture of fear and curiosity. She wanted to retreat, to flee into the safety of the familiar. And yet something in his sorrow, in the weight of his solitude, drew her closer. She sensed a story older than the forest itself, a story of regret, of mistakes that could not be undone, and of redemption that hung just beyond reach. For days, the king remained near the edge of the forest, neither intruding nor retreating. He watched over them silently, appearing when danger approached or when the forest whispered of unseen threats.
The boy's defiance remained sharp, yet he began to notice small acts of mercy, the way the king's gaze softened when Mara fell ill, or how he would intercept a stray wolf far from the village without harming it. Mara observed these moments too. She could not deny the king's presence was a strange comfort, though it was mingled with fear. She began to see him as a being bound by sorrow and responsibility, a creature who had once been human, who had lost much and who now sought something he could scarcely name. One evening, as the sky turned violet with the setting sun, Mara ventured into the forest alone. Drawn by an almost magnetic pull, she followed a narrow path of silvered leaves, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon her. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old magic. She stumbled upon a clearing where the king waited, kneeling beneath the branches of an ancient oak. The fading light made his silver hair glow like threads of moonlight. His amber eyes fixed on her carried a depth she could not read.
You should not have come here, he said softly, though there was no anger in his tone.
I felt drawn, Mara admitted.
I don't understand why, but I had to see. The king rose, the forest seeming to bend around him, shadows stretching and swirling like living things. The bond that brings you here, it is older than time. You carry a fragment of what has been lost to me.
And that fragment may be the key to salvation or destruction. Mara shivered.
Salvation! Destruction! What are you saying? He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, though he kept a careful distance. I have lived for centuries in solitude, burdened by a curse I cannot lift alone. You and your son are connected to that curse. What happens next depends on choices you do not yet understand. Her heart ached at the weight of his words. She had never known such responsibility, and yet the intensity of his gaze made her feel as though she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Before she could speak further, a howl shattered the quiet of the forest. Not the howl of a wolf, but something sharper, colder, and full of malice. The king's eyes narrowed instantly. "Stay close to me," he commanded. And before Mara could protest, he swept her behind him, moving with impossible speed through the shadows. In the distance, dark shapes moved between the trees, figures that had not been there before. Mara realized with sudden clarity that danger was not just a story here. It was real, and it was coming for them. The king moved with a grace that seemed to defy the natural world, leading her through hidden paths only he knew. The forest twisted and turned, yet they emerged into a hollow ringed by silvered stones, the air humming with old magic. He lowered himself into a defensive stance, eyes scanning the forest. Mara's breath came in quick gasps, and she realized she was no longer frightened of him, only of the unknown. "They will not harm you," he said, almost to himself, as he faced the darkness. "Not while I draw breath." The figures emerged fully now, shadows of humans and beasts, twisted by dark magic, their eyes glinting with hunger. Mara's heart pounded, but she felt no panic. The king was there, and his presence was both terrifying and strangely reassuring. Elias, if he had been here, would have been yelling and charging forward. Mara realized then how much the boy had inherited her courage. And yet, this time, she would not leave the fight to him alone. She clenched her fists, feeling a spark of determination she had not known she possessed. The king moved forward, and the shadows recoiled as if the very air bent to his will. He fought with precision, not recklessly, each movement calculated to protect rather than destroy. Mara watched, awestruck, as centuries of experience and sorrow translated into strength and control. When the last shadow retreated, melting into the forest like smoke, the king lowered his gaze to her. "You see now," he said quietly, "why you are connected to this world. Danger and destiny are intertwined, and you cannot turn away." Mara nodded, words failing her. Her heart had raced, her blood had surged, and she understood, finally, that her life and her son's would never be the same. The king turned his gaze to the east, where the sun was rising, bathing the forest in pale gold. "There will be more," he said. "More tests, more threats, and choices that will shape everything. But know this, I will not let harm come to you or your son, not while I still stand.
Mara felt an ache, a mixture of fear, longing, and something unnameable.
She realized that the king's power was not just in his strength, but in the weight of his sorrow, the depth of his patience, and the promise of redemption hidden in the shadow of centuries. She looked into the forest one last time before turning back toward the cottage.
Elias, she whispered, we are part of something greater than we imagined. Something dangerous, but also necessary.
The king watched them retreat, kneeling once more at the forest's edge. His amber eyes glimmered with an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel for centuries. Hope, perhaps, or longing, or the faintest flicker of redemption. And somewhere, deep within the twisted paths of the forest, a voice whispered a warning. Not to Mara, not to Elias, but to the king.
What comes next will not be chosen. It will be earned.
The forest had grown darker since the morning, though the sun still lingered on the horizon. Mist wound around the twisted trees like silver ribbons, and every rustle of leaves carried a whisper that seemed almost alive. Mara clutched Elias's hand tightly as they walked along a narrow path the king had shown them. Their steps were cautious, yet Mara could feel an invisible pull urging her forward into the unknown.
Mom, do you think he's telling the truth? Elias asked, his small voice trembling. About the prophecy and the danger? Mara paused, her gaze sweeping the gray shadows between the trees.
I don't know, Elias, but I think he is. There is a weight to him, something older than anything I've ever felt. And the forest, it listens to him. Elias shivered.
It's like the trees are alive.
They are,
Mara whispered, and so is the darkness that follows him. Ahead, the Lycan king waited beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak. The wind made his silver hair shimmer like pale fire, and his amber eyes held the gravity of centuries. He observed them silently, kneeling once again in the shadow of the tree, as if the weight of his own burden pressed him to the ground.
You are ready, he said, rising to his full height, and the forest seemed to shrink around him. But know this,
what lies ahead is not a test of strength. It is a test of the heart.
Elias's brow furrowed.
The heart? Yes, the king said. Power is meaningless without understanding it, without compassion, without courage. It becomes a weapon that can destroy more than it protects. You, Mara, you carry something within you that can awaken what I have lost.
But it must be done willingly, with clarity and purpose. Mara's chest tightened.
Awaken, you mean your curse?
The curse is mine, he admitted.
I was once human like you, but greed, betrayal, and fear twisted me, bound me to a life between beast and man. I can destroy, but I cannot live truly. Not until what was lost is returned. Elias's eyes widened. So, you've been stuck like this? Forever? For centuries, the king said, his voice thick with sorrow. And I have been alone until you appeared. You and your son are threads in the tapestry I cannot repair alone.
Mara tried to comprehend the weight of his words. The centuries, the sorrow, the loneliness, it was unimaginable. And yet, despite the fear he inspired, there was something almost human in his voice, something that whispered of regret, longing, and the hope for redemption.
Why us?
She asked softly.
Why would my bloodline matter to you? The king's gaze softened, distant and almost gentle. Because your ancestors, they were keepers of the balance I broke. They carried what I lost. And through you, the chance to undo the past remains. But it is fragile, and not without danger.
Elias pulled Mara closer.
Mom, what if it's too dangerous? What if he's tricking us?
The king's amber eyes flickered with faint amusement. He trusts even when he fears.
That is rare, and it is a gift.
Mara's heart ached at the mixture of grief and hope she saw in him. Despite the monstrous form, the claws, the fearsome power, he was not a creature of cruelty. He was a being haunted by his past, desperate for the possibility of redemption. "You must understand," he continued, "the moment you touch the heart of what has been lost,
You will awaken me. I am not the man I once was. I am bound by the curse, and the darkness within me will rise. Only your courage."
only your willingness can guide what follows." Mara swallowed hard.
Elias tugged at her sleeve.
Mom, I don't want you to get hurt.
"I know," she whispered.
But sometimes, courage means risking what we love to save what we cannot yet see. The king stepped back, his claws digging into the soft earth, his gaze scanning the forest as if expecting an enemy at every turn.
"Then you must choose. Stay in the safety you know, or step forward and face the unknown. One step will change everything."
A low growl echoed from the shadows. Mara's heart leapt into her throat.
Figures emerged between the trees, moving with unnatural silence, beings warped by dark magic, eyes glowing with malice. "They have come," the king said, "and this is the first trial." Elias stepped in front of Mara, fists clenched. "I won't let them hurt you. You cannot stop what comes," the king said, his voice both gentle and commanding. "But I will guide you. Trust me." Mara took a deep breath, feeling the pull of something she had never known. The fear and uncertainty were strong, but beneath them lay a current of purpose she could not deny. She glanced at Elias. "We do this together," she said, "no matter what." The king's gaze met hers. There was something unspoken there, a flicker of vulnerability, a glimpse of humanity behind the beastly exterior. "Then step forward," he said, "and awaken what has been lost." Mara moved first, feeling the strange energy of the forest respond to her presence. The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing and twisting, as if sensing the change in her. The king moved beside her, claws held ready but not attacking. He was a sentinel, a guardian, and perhaps something more. The creatures lunged, and the king moved with impossible speed, intercepting them with precision and strength. Mara felt the fear rise, yet it was tempered by awe. The king was not only powerful, he was disciplined, controlled, and every motion carried centuries of experience. Elias watched from behind a tree, small and tense, yet brave. He realized that courage alone could not protect them, but the king's skill combined with their own determination might just be enough. After what felt like hours but was only moments, the last shadow fell back into the mist, disappearing as quickly as it had come. Mara's chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The king lowered his stance, his eyes glinting amber in the dim light. "You are stronger than you know," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "But strength alone will not save what must be protected." Mara felt a mixture of relief and unease. The danger had passed, for now. But the king's words lingered like smoke. There was more to come, trials that would test the limits of her courage and the bond between her and her son. She turned to him, the weight of the moment pressing down. "What happens now?" The king's gaze softened, distant and almost human.
"Now, you rest."
"But tomorrow the forest will test you again, and the choices you make will awaken the curse or leave it unbroken. You cannot see it yet, but every step you take shapes what is to come." Elias tugged at her sleeve. "Mom?"
"I want to help. I want to be brave like him."
"You already are," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "But bravery isn't just fighting. It's knowing when to stand, when to wait, and when to trust." The king stepped closer, his presence immense, yet careful.
"And sometimes bravery is choosing to open your heart when fear would close it. Mara, the bond we share, it may awaken the humanity I have lost, but it must be chosen, willingly, without hesitation."
Mara's chest tightened. The idea of touching the darkness of awakening the king's cursed heart was terrifying. Yet she could feel the pull. the sense that this moment was inevitable, that the threads of destiny were drawing her forward whether she wished it or not. The wind stirred the trees, carrying a faint, almost musical hum.
Mara recognized it as the song of the ancient forest, a voice older than time itself, calling to her, guiding her. It was both beautiful and unsettling, filled with promises and warnings.
"You hear it?" the king asked, voice soft.
Mara nodded. "Yes, it's calling me, but I don't know why."
Because it knows what you carry, he said.
"And because it knows the choices you must make, what happens next will shape more than your lives. It will shape the future of this realm, the fate of what has been lost for centuries."
Elias stepped forward, eyes wide.
"Then we'll face it. Together."
The king's amber eyes softened, and for the first time Mara thought she saw a flicker of hope beneath the centuries of sorrow.
"Very well," he said. "But know this, the curse cannot be broken by strength alone. It must be met with courage, wisdom, and a heart willing to face the truth.
And once it awakens, there is no turning back."
Mara took a deep breath, feeling the pull of destiny tighten around her chest.
She glanced at Elias, seeing the courage and determination in his small frame. Together they had faced fear, danger, and the unknown.
And now, the true trial awaited. The king stepped back, lowering his head slightly, and a hush fell over the forest. Shadows lingered as if holding their breath. Mara knew that the moment of choice had come, and that the path forward would demand more than fearlessness.
One step, she realized. One step could awaken the curse.
One choice could change everything. And as the forest hummed with ancient magic, Mara felt the pull of destiny stronger than ever before.
The forest was silent, yet it thrummed with an energy Mara had never felt before. Shadows clung to every tree, twisting as though alive. The silvered light of the rising moon mixed with the first golden streaks of dawn, painting the world in hues of uncertainty and promise. Mara stood at the center of the ancient stone circle, Elias by her side, and the Lycan king facing her across the space. His amber eyes glimmered with a mixture of sorrow and hope. This was the moment, the choice that would awaken the cursed heart he had carried for centuries. Elias looked up at his mother, worry etched into his small features.
"Mom, are you sure about this?"
Mara took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. "I have to try, Elias."
"There is no other way. He's been trapped for centuries. And if we do this, perhaps we can all be free."
The king lowered his head in acknowledgement, the tension in his broad shoulders relaxing just slightly.
"Then step forward," he said, "and do not hesitate. Your courage will guide what is to come."
Mara's steps echoed on the stone floor as she moved toward him.
With each step, the energy of the forest seemed to grow, wrapping around her like a living current. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing down, the centuries of the king's sorrow, the danger of what might awaken.
Elias gripped her hand tightly. "I'm with you," he whispered.
"Always."
The king extended a hand, claws retracted, his presence both commanding and fragile. Mara reached for him, her fingertips brushing the fur of his chest where his cursed heart beat beneath. The moment their skin touched, a wave of energy rippled through the forest. The king's amber eyes closed, and a low, pained sound escaped him. Shadows surged around them, dark and twisting, yet they did not strike. Instead, they recoiled, as if respecting the power of the choice Mara had made.
"I see it," the king whispered, voice strained. "I feel it, the humanity I thought lost."
She realized that her courage, her willingness to face the unknown, had begun to awaken the man beneath the curse, the being who had been trapped between beast and sorrow for centuries. Elias watched in awe, feeling both fear and pride. His mother was fearless, but more than that, she was compassionate, willing to embrace the unknown to save a life that had been imprisoned by darkness. The forest seemed to respond to the king's awakening. Leaves rustled softly, a gentle wind spiraled through the ancient trees, and the shadows, though still present, softened into shapes that reflected the forest's life rather than its menace.
"You have done what none before could,"
the king said, his voice stronger, yet still tinged with centuries of sadness.
You have touched what was lost without fear and without malice. Mara stepped back slightly, breathing heavily.
The forest's energy still pulsed, but it felt alive and protective rather than threatening.
What happens now?
She asked softly. The king's amber eyes opened fully, brighter than they had ever been, filled with clarity and something almost human, relief, gratitude, and hope. Now, he said, we face what has been waiting. From the deeper shadows of the forest a figure emerged, tall, dark, and menacing. This was the one who had sent the twisted creatures before, the shadowed enemy who had waited for centuries for the king's fall. Its eyes glowed with greed and malice, its presence radiating the same ancient dark energy that had haunted the realm.
You cannot stop me, it hissed. The curse belongs to darkness, and it will obey me. The king stepped forward, placing himself between Mara, Elias, and the shadow. No, he said, voice deep and unwavering. It obeys no one but the heart that chooses to wield it with courage and wisdom.
And that heart has awakened. Mara felt the forest pulse beneath her feet, the energy of the ancient stones, the trees, and the awakened king intertwined with her own resolve. She realized then that courage was not just bravery, it was trust, understanding, and love. And in that moment she could feel the bond between her, Elias, and the king solidify into something unbreakable.
Elias stepped forward, small but fierce. You won't hurt us, he shouted, his voice echoing across the clearing.
Not while we stand together, the shadow recoiled, surprised by the unity and strength of those it sought to divide. The king's form shifted, muscles tensing as the curse tried to assert itself. But this time, the darkness met resistance.
Mara's courage acted as a tether, guiding the power of the king's awakening toward protection rather than destruction. The battle was swift, not of brute force, but of will and heart.
The shadow lunged, dark tendrils snapping like lightning, but the king deflected each strike with precision, guided by centuries of experience. Mara felt herself connected to the energy, her resolve shaping the flow of the battle. Elias dodged and guided them, his small instincts surprisingly sharp in the chaos. Finally, the shadow faltered, unable to pierce the combined will of the awakened king and the unwavering courage of Mara and Elias. With a final, echoing howl, the darkness shattered, dispersing into the mist that clung to the trees. The forest exhaled, releasing centuries of tension. The king sank to one knee, breathing heavily, his fur glistening with dew from the energy that had surged through him. Mara approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's over," she said softly. For the first time he looked fully human, or as close to it as centuries of curses would allow. "No!" he whispered, voice trembling with relief and wonder.
It is only the beginning, but now I am free.
Because of you. Because of your courage.
Elias ran forward, throwing his arms around Mara, then cautiously reaching toward the king. "You're really awake?" he asked. The king's amber eyes softened, warmth replacing the sorrow that had haunted them for so long. "Yes," he said, smiling faintly.
And I am grateful, grateful beyond words.
For you both. The sun broke fully over the horizon, casting golden light into the clearing.
The mist lifted, revealing the forest in full splendor. Birds sang, leaves shimmered, and the shadows that had once threatened now seemed gentle, almost playful.
The curse had been broken, not through violence, but through courage, trust, and compassion.
Mara felt a profound sense of relief, tempered with awe. She had faced fear, unknown forces, and the weight of centuries, and yet she stood unbroken. Beside her, Elias beamed, proud of the role he had played, small but brave. The king rose, towering but calm, and bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. "I kneel no longer out of sorrow," he said,
"but in gratitude and in promise. I will guard you, Elias, and you, Mara, not as a master, but as a protector, a companion, and perhaps something more."
Mara's breath caught. Something more, she realized, was the connection they had forged through trust, courage, and shared danger. It was not a fleeting feeling, but a bond that transcended fear, a bond forged in the crucible of choice and heart. Elias tugged at her sleeve.
Mom, is it really over? Mara smiled, kneeling to his level. For now, yes. But the forest and the world will always hold challenges. What matters is how we face them together.
The king watched them, the weight of centuries finally lifting from his shoulders. And I will face them with you, he said. For as long as I draw breath. Mara felt the energy of the ancient stones beneath her feet, the life of the forest surrounding them, and the warmth of the king beside her. She knew that the darkness might return someday, but now the power of courage, love, and trust had awakened something far stronger than any curse. Elias looked up at the king, admiration shining in his young eyes.
I think I understand now. Courage isn't about fighting alone. It's about standing together.
The king nodded.
Exactly, young one. And your mother. She has the heart that guides all of us.
Mara reached out and touched the king's hand, feeling the pulse of life, strength, and redemption flowing through him. The centuries of sorrow were still a part of him, but now tempered with hope. And as the sun rose fully, casting its golden light across the forest, Mara, Elias, and the Lycan king stood together, united by trust, courage, and the bond forged in the shadows. They had faced fear, darkness, and destiny itself, and emerged transformed. The forest whispered around them, not with threat, but with a quiet celebration of life restored. But somewhere in the distance the wind carried a faint hint of shadow, a reminder that the world was vast, and the story of courage and redemption was never truly finished. Yet for now, the dawn was theirs, and the darkness had been held at bay. Mara looked at the king and Elias, her heart full.
We are ready, she whispered. Whatever comes next, we face it together.
The king bowed slightly, amber eyes glowing warmly.
Together, he echoed. And in that quiet, luminous moment, the forest seemed to sigh. A sigh of relief, of renewal, of the promise of a future forged not by fear or curse, but by courage, trust, and a heart willing to embrace the impossible.
The Lycan king, once bound by centuries of sorrow, now knelt not in despair, but in reverence to the courage that had awakened him, and to the bond that would guide them all into whatever dawn awaited.